If you want to understand Confederate monuments, you have to come to places like this. This is a church graveyard. It's a primitive Baptist church cemetery in North Florida, actually just north of Gainesville, Florida. People don't even realize that Florida is a southern state. It was the third state to secede from the Union in 1861. When I discovered all of my ancestors were fighting for the South, I haven't found any northern Union soldiers yet, so the whole story about brother versus brother, it's not true. If you lived in the North, you fought for the North. If you lived in the South, you fought for the South. And if you lived in the border states, you fought for whatever side of the battle line you were on at the time, because if someone rode up on your farm and told you you're coming with us, you're going with them. And it might be a blue uniform, it might be a gray uniform. And I'm sure there were a few instances where one person wanted to fight for one side and one for the other, but in my experience, they all fought for their local friends, neighbors, and family. Let's get started on understanding these monuments. I'm sitting next to a headstone here. This happens to be Lydia Anderson. She is my great-great-great-grandmother. I knew my great-grandmother really well, and so this woman was her grandmother. But she never talked about her. I never knew about her until I built my family tree. And when I find her, I learned that she wasn't married one time. She was married twice. And her first husband, his name was Coleman Groover. So she marries a man named Coleman Groover, and they have 3 children. Everything's going well for them in life until the Civil War starts. So her husband, like every other man in the South, and when I say every other man, I mean if you find a male of military age in your family tree living between 1861 and 1865, it's literally a 92% chance that they served in the Confederate Army. 92%. I mean, I don't know who didn't serve. I'm not really sure how they were excluded, but a few people, maybe they had some type of physical problem or something. But you got to understand that their grandfathers and their great-grandfathers, they were patriots in the American Revolution. They created the United States of America. They fought the British in the Revolutionary War and established the United States. So you have to ask yourself, why were these people so committed to creating a different country? Why would they want to separate from the country that their grandfathers and their great-grandfathers created in the first place? It's a really good question. And so I've spent a lot of time trying to understand that. I'm an amateur historian. I clean veteran headstones is the mission that I'm on right now. So if you'd like to help, that's the main reason why I'm producing this video today. There's certain people that it doesn't matter what information you provide, they won't want to know anything about Southern people. We need to humanize, in my opinion, the people of the South, because in my estimation today there are at least 50 million people in America that descend from a Confederate soldier. If you look at the population of African Americans in America today compared to the population in 1860, and you apply that same growth rate to the white Southern population in 1860, you're going to get to 50 million. Most of those folks probably have no idea because they've not built their family tree. We tend to forget our ancestors within 3 generations. So this is an opportunity for me to share with you a little bit about what I learned, and hopefully you'll learn something here to the point where maybe you'll want to get out into these cemeteries and learn more about your family and learn more about others, because I think what's going to help us come together as a country, as a people, I think we need empathy. So if you're a white person and you haven't thought a lot about what it's like to be a black person in America, then I encourage you to do some research, spend some time, and empathize with what it might be that a person of African American descent might be challenged with in life. And the same goes for Southern people, because I'm a Southerner and I listen to it every day. I listen to it, and it's something that doesn't make you feel very good. It doesn't make me very happy, you know, and I don't want to feel that way. But when somebody says something that is hateful towards me, I don't think that's any different than if I were to say something hateful about someone else. I want to share with you today why I think that people should have some empathy for others. There's a lot of different types of people in America. We're a melting pot. And so we need to treat each other as if we're all equal and stop this separation that we have amongst ourselves. I'm going to humanize these Confederate monuments in this video so that you can understand they are not monuments to white supremacy. They are not about a love of slavery. I'll only say one thing about slavery, and I want you to do your own homework. But the 13th Amendment is when slavery ended in the United States of America. This is really uncomfortable for those of you who are just so focused on Civil War and slavery and cannot separate the two. The 13th Amendment failed to pass the United States House of Representatives on the first vote. There were no Southern people represented in Congress at that time. In my opinion, it was the abolitionists who were the heroes of ending slavery in America. And I believe they were a minority of the population, but they had heroes like Frederick Douglass who were able to speak with Lincoln and to change the reason why the war was being fought, because they didn't have a really good reason other than to save the Union, whatever that meant. Some people that meant something too, but other people that didn't resonate with them, because they weren't members of the United States. They were citizens of Virginia, or they were citizens of Ohio, or Massachusetts, or Alabama. We hadn't come together as that country yet. It was the rise of the federal government. 13th Amendment, study up on that. See for yourself. The North, 800,000 slaves were in the northern states, the lower north. Don't let people tell you that's the upper south. That's the lower north. Those states like New Jersey, Delaware, Maryland, Kentucky, Tennessee, and Missouri. 800,000 enslaved African Americans living in those states. They aren't free until the 13th Amendment gets passed. They're specifically excluded from the Emancipation Proclamation. Read that document. It's uncomfortable, isn't it? But it's true. And so it takes all the way to 1865, 4 years after this thing, more than 4 years this Civil War has been going on, before the North can vote a majority, a 2/3 majority, to end slavery with the 13th Amendment. I would say that it should have been unanimous. I think today we can all agree that it should be unanimous, that slavery is not right. But back in those days, the northern states, the northern representatives could not put together 2/3 majority vote in the House. No Southerners voting. So when the Civil War is talked about as being all about slavery, but they don't really talk too much about the fact that how long would have slavery lasted had the South not seceded, and all of those representatives from those southern states, would they have voted for the 13th Amendment? I don't think so. So it would have been a long time before the number of votes could have been found in the United States House of Representatives and the Senate to end slavery in America. They couldn't even end it with the North alone. Are there monuments that were hateful? I'm sure there are, because there's not just one monument. And so I think you have to take each one within the context of why it was made and where it was placed and why it was placed, the time period, the context in which it happened. But I'm going to talk about the vast majority of those Confederate monuments that you see in courthouse squares. So we're gonna start humanizing this, because the Southern people that I descend from, I'm actually a product of the Civil War. I don't ever get born if the Civil War doesn't happen. And the reason why is because this woman buried here, my great-great-great-grandmother, her first husband was killed in action as a Confederate soldier at the Battle of the Wilderness. He fought at Gettysburg. He fought at 2nd Manassas. He was at Antietam. He was at Fredericksburg. He was at Chancellorsville. These battlefields were such a horrible human cost that they turned them into national battlefield sites, part of the National Park Service. He survived all of them up until the wilderness. She never got his body back. He probably decomposed on the battlefield. So if you look at those photos of Civil War, black and white photos, and you see those skeletons laying out there strewn across the field, that was possibly her husband. So when you try to put it in context of the incomprehensible loss and mourning that went on during and after the Civil War in the South, it truly is something we can't comprehend. But I'm going to give you a little taste of what it might have been like, so maybe you can start to have some empathy and understand why you're seeing these monuments and what we do with monuments. That's not my decision, and I really don't have an opinion on that, because again, I do empathize with other people. But I ask you to look at those monuments and look at how large they are, and think about why are our World War II monuments only a third of the size. There was a reason why they spent money that they really didn't have. They had to sacrifice to do that. And let me tell you why. We're going to talk about that, where every one of the male members of Lydia Anderson's family of military age within one person from her fought for the Confederacy. They went off to war. 30 that I found, and there are more, but records are not all complete. And some of the names are so common. Like if someone's named James Allen, you know how many James Allens there were in 1862? A lot, so it's very difficult to determine whether or not they really were a soldier. So when I say 30, I've confirmed 30 of her family members, her husband, her brothers, her uncles, her first cousins. These are the closest people, her brother-in-laws. I'm not talking about distant family. These are the closest you have. They all left, and a third of them did not come home. 9 of her family members died Confederate soldiers. So put that in perspective. How many of your family members died during World War II? One of mine, she lost 9. Another 6 came home after being wounded. Several more were held as prisoner of war in some of the most hellacious conditions in Union prisoner of war camps you can ever imagine. You go to Andersonville, they were just as bad in the North, and some were even worse. So the suffering that went on. Her brother was shot in the face at the Battle of Antietam, but he went back. He went back and he continued to fight. He gets shot through both thighs at the Battle of Chancellorsville. Can you imagine being shot through both of your thighs? And yet he continued to fight. So you wonder, why were they doing this? 1 million Southern men went off to fight for the South. That's 20% of the population, and a third of them died. That's just incomprehensible. The loss, we were nowhere near those numbers in World War I or World War II. No other war did we have statistics like that. And in the Civil War, only the South had statistics like that. The North had 4 times the number of people. There were millions and millions and millions of military-age men that did not serve in the Union Army. But in the South, again, 92% chance you're going to serve. So when these men heard about the war picking up, that Lincoln was going to invade the South with 75,000 troops, they were not new to the issue of warfare. Some of them had fought in the Indian Wars already. Their dads fought in the War of 1812 against the British, and their grandfathers and their great-grandfathers fought in the Revolutionary War. They had militias in the South because they were used to having to fight to survive. So when the war comes, they're somewhat prepared. They don't have weapons, but they have shotguns. They have weapons, but not weapons of war to be able to defend against the United States Army. Her husband joins Company B of the 5th Florida Infantry Regiment. You follow the 5th Florida. They fought dozens of battles. I mean, it's unbelievable. Just it never ended for 4 years. After the war, she's a widow with 3 children, and another soldier comes home who's my great-great-great-grandfather, a man named Leonard Anderson, and he had fought with Company A of the 7th Florida. He joined at 17 years old, ended up in a training camp here near Gainesville, and a trainload of infield rifles smuggled in from England. Supposedly there were 10,000 rifles on this train car. It parked near Gainesville on its way to a place called Shiloh, one of the biggest battles of the Civil War. So my grandfather, I know, carried an infield rifle into battle because I've seen where he was checked into a hospital on a receipt where he checked in 1 infield rifle. I can envision him taking that rifle off of that train car because they needed weapons. When you have 30 of your family members go off to war, 9 of them are left on the battlefield somewhere up north. 6 of them come home missing arms, fingers, eyes, and others suffering from post-traumatic stress disorder that you can't even imagine after being through 38 battles. They would leave town with 100 to 120 of their neighbors, family, and friends in a company. They would raise a company in a county, and they would join together with 10 other companies to form a regiment. So that regiment would be between 1,000 and 1,200 men. At the end of the war, when the surrender happened at Appomattox and the surrender happened at North Carolina after the Battle of Bentonville, there would be only 50 to 65 men left out of 1,200. That's the level of loss that happened during the Civil War for the Southern people. The Civil War ends, the South is devastated financially, the human toll unimaginable. And so what do these people do? Do they just let it go, move on with their lives? How do you do that after 9 of your family members don't come home, and it's your husband, it's the father of your children? What about those children who listened to their fathers tell them stories about what it was like to fight in these battles during the Civil War? Battles so horrible. My grandfather Leonard Anderson, his son's buried right there. Talk about him in a minute. Do you think his son may have ever talked to his dad and heard stories about what it was like to fight at Kennesaw Mountain, where the bodies of Union soldiers piled up so high in front of the Union line? In the heat of the day, the bodies were decomposing and swelling and bloating. The smell, the stench was so bad, they called a truce. Both sides came together to bury the dead just to get rid of the stink. And after they finished burying those dead corpses, the truce was ended. They went back to killing each other again. Again, these things are hard for us to understand today, but these people, they understood it back then. They lived it. They listened to their daddies tell them stories about it. And you can bet that Lydia Anderson's first 3 children, who lost their daddy, killed in action, left on a battlefield to rot and decompose at the Battle of the Wilderness, do you think they forgot about their father? So when they decided to honor all of their dead that didn't come home, they built monuments to them. They're kind of like giant headstones, I guess would be the best way to describe it. I would bet that those people probably donated some of their hard-earned money, what little they had, toward building that monument because they loved their father. They loved their uncle. They loved their cousins. They were in mourning. They would have loved to have known them. And to have lost the war and lost everything, including all of your loved ones like that, I guess that was a way that maybe that's how they were able to survive. So we've forgotten about who those people were, but it was so close to them. So all these people have died and moved on, but these monuments are left as reminders of the pain that they felt, of the mourning that they experienced, the extreme catastrophic loss. So it's a different way of looking at these monuments, and you can look at them however you choose to look at them. I'm just giving you a different perspective, a human perspective. I just found this headstone today. I'm sure there's a reason why I found it. I noticed this name, Groovers. It's spelled incorrectly. There's an extra S in there, but James R. Groovers. His name was James Groover. This is my uncle. Born in 1861, his daddy was killed in battle when he was just a very small boy, would have never known him, but you can bet that he never forgot his dad. He had uncles, and those uncles would have told him about what it was like when they watched his daddy being killed in battle. His uncles were with his dad, Coleman Groover, with Company B of the 5th Florida Infantry Regiment. And they charged Cemetery Ridge and Pickett's Charge at the Battle of Gettysburg side by side. On the day that his daddy was killed in battle, his uncle was captured and was sent to a Union prisoner of war camp. He, I'm sure, shared with him what that was like. So there was probably not a lot of love lost between survivors of the Civil War in the South and the United States of America, but they did come together. You can see them shaking hands across the fence at Gettysburg. Americans do their duty. They don't go to war because they're murderers or they're hateful. They do their duty when they're called upon to do so. And it's no different here in the South. When they were called to serve, they did. Back in those days, they weren't loyal to the United States of America. That wasn't their sovereign. Their sovereign was their state. They fought for their state. It's hard for us to comprehend that today, but you do your homework, you're going to find out that was the case. So this is my great-great-grandfather here. His daddy was a Confederate soldier, and he would have spoken with him and known what it was like, what his dad had endured. One of the stories is that, and it's not a story, this is a true story, the 7th Florida was at the Battle of Chickamauga. They were then at the Battle of Missionary Ridge, and when they got up to the top of the ridge, the 7th Florida was ordered down back to the rifle trenches. I called them rifle pits, and they were to hold that ground at all hazards. They were overrun by the Union advance, and somehow or another his daddy survived that. He was not captured like most of the people in the 7th Florida. Being shot at as you're running for your life is probably something that would have been hair-raising for a boy to listen to his daddy tell. And this is my uncle Lemuel Anderson. He was also a son of Leonard Anderson, and he too would have known what it was like for his father to have fought in the Civil War. He would also have known what it was like for his mother to have lost her first husband and know that he would never have been born had Coleman Groover not been killed in battle. So as we look at those monuments that we typically see in these courthouse squares all over the South, understand that those monuments were built by survivors of the Civil War who were mourning for their family members that made the ultimate sacrifice in service to what they considered at that time to be their country. One other example would be Stone Mountain, Georgia. There's a carving on the side of Stone Mountain. You've probably seen it, probably heard about it in the news. That was designed by the same man that designed Mount Rushmore. Well, you probably don't know, we're talking about again the reason these monuments exist. That monument was an incredibly expensive feat to accomplish, and the way they raised money was they would have school children and adults would raise $1, and in return for $1 for donating, they would get a medallion, a commemorative coin medallion. Those are reminders of how hard and how important these people thought it was to memorialize their war dead and the sacrifices that their family members had made in service to their country. They scraped and saved to be able to give that $1, and eventually they raised enough money to have that monument made. And you may not remember, but Atlanta was burned, okay? Watch Gone with the Wind, you see Atlanta burning. There was Kennesaw Mountain right before that. There was a Battle of Resica. I know one of Grandma Lydia Anderson's family members was killed at the Battle of Resica. So Atlanta knows really well what it was like to experience the Civil War. When Sherman came through there burning his way from Atlanta to Savannah, when his famous march to the sea, those people that were left in the aftermath of that, they didn't forget. And so they wanted to do something, and that's what they did. They built that mural. When you see these things and you wonder, just do a little bit of research and homework to try to empathize with why these people may have done what they did. They were no different than you and me. They were people born into the context in which they lived, which would have been 1825 to 1846. And at that time, we don't know what it was like to live back then. We can read about it, but we don't really know exactly what it was like. So they're born into that context. And it's for us to study and try to just understand, you know, why America has done all the things that it's done for all of these years, and going forward, what do we want our country to be like? And I hope that what this video will do for viewers is help us to empathize with one another, help us to come together. We really need to do that. This separation's got to end, you know. It really does. And the only way we're going to do that is if we love one another. Maybe we need to turn back to Christ. Maybe we need to go back to our churches. Maybe we need to go to church together, you know. And maybe we can really start living by what God's told us to do, which is, first of all, to love God with all our hearts, and the second is to love your neighbor no differently. And that includes every neighbor, whether that person just came here yesterday or their family arrived 400 years ago, or their family's been here for 10,000 years. We're all living here together now. We've got to get rid of this animosity towards one another. And I think it's going to start with people like Henry Louis Gates to change their narrative on their television shows and try to be more loving towards all. Because, again, we're all God's children. We can do better than what we've done. We have lost a little over 1.3 million Americans have died in military conflicts since our country was founded. And 300,000 of them are Southerners that died during the Civil War. We're talking 20% of our war dead are Confederate soldiers. When you find the headstone of an African American man who was born a slave and who voluntarily picked up a rifle to join the Union Army to fight for freedom, you've got to respect that, you know, because that took a lot of courage, a tremendous amount of courage. And so even though that man may have killed my grandfather, may have killed my cousin, I don't look at it like that. I look at it as that was an honorable man who did what he believed in and was willing to die for it. When it comes to slavery, there's plenty of blame to go around, and pinning it on the Southern people, it's convenient for folks that may not connect themselves to being a Southerner, but it was a larger situation than that.